Hello and welcome to Play It Again, a podcast about books, movies, music, art, about how we consume culture and how it shapes us. My name is Prakriti Tiwari.
And I'm Raja Sen.
And for this episode, we are going to be talking about something that we are very excited to talk about. So, if you've been following this podcast, one of the segments that we have in this podcast, particularly when we're speaking to guests, is one in which we recommend to them books, art, music, movies that remind us of their work. This could be individual pieces of work that they've created or their body of work. And this segment has been very fun so far. A lot of a lot of very unexpected things have come up. A lot of very surprising things have come up. The reactions have been very, very interesting. So we thought that for this particular episode, why don't we consider this idea at length? One of the most pleasurable things about how we consume books and movies and art that we engage with is the kind of rabbit holes that they open up, for us to go into. A book might remind you of a film, might remind you of an artist's um, imagery, might remind you of an album that you really love, and these kind of free associations, when they start to blossom, um, open up conversations that within ourselves, which are so interesting and so rewarding.
And it's, like you said, it's so mixed media, right? It's like a wine and cheese pairing. Like what will go with one thing and what complements something artistically or in terms of consuming art is so unexpected and so immediately it gives a fresh perspective to whatever it is that we do consume.
Yeah, and the fresh perspective. So obviously it's exciting because you don't know what will spark what in your head, and if you create room for it, then the excitement kind of really builds up. But it's also about the fact that this has the ability to uncover layers in books or films or an artist's oeuvre that we haven't really given much credence or thought to before, but enough theorizing.
Hmm.
Let's take a practical example. Raja, why don't you tell us about a rabbit hole that you went down this year? You've named multiple ones, but something that really stands out for you.
Yeah, this year I think what was very exciting for me was, after David Lynch passed away, which was it was quite a moment, and there was this collective outpouring of grief around the world. A lot of people who were not aware of his films were still aware of him as a person, maybe just, reading out weather reports on the internet wearing sunglasses, but just a really unique man with really fantastic hair. So he was always one of those people to idolize. But when I, read about Lynch passing away, and I wanted to revisit his work. And of course, you go down the drive and say, Mulholland Drive or Lost Highway. But for me, the first film of David Lynch that I ever saw as a teenager, and there's something to be said for the kind of cinema that you see without any baggage of knowing who's made it, right? I mean, now we look at David Lynch and there's this big David Lynch is on the marquee and we consume him differently. But that was Star Movies, and that was a film called Wild at Heart with Nicolas Cage and Laura Dern, where Nicolas Cage wears a snakeskin jacket and is very possessive about it. And it's a film that was always very powerful to me as a young man. Just this very, very sexy, very exciting road film, a romance, and all of that. But also, it was a film that taught me that high culture and low culture can, or popular culture can coexist, because it was a film where the entire film is basically Lynch's love letter to the Wizard of Oz. And it ends with that sort of thing where the good witch appears and basically tells Nicolas Cage what to do, because his character is obsessed with that film. So it was really that's what I watched, and I loved it all over again, and made me want to get a jacket. But I watched The Wizard of Oz again, and watching The Wizard of Oz again, because we've all seen it, we all have our favorite moments, we all have the hut flying through the sky and all of that. But it becomes now, for a certain generation of us at least, that becomes immediately evocative of the Pink Floyd album, The Dark Side of the Moon, because they're taken together, right? It's this bizarre conspiracy theory that this film and this piece of music are synchronized, and they have this funny synchronicity. But that was fun to do, to watch Wizard of Oz. What I wanted to revisit really was the Sidney Lumet film, the kind of misguided misfire called The Wiz, with Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, and this bizarre musical of The Wizard of Oz. And I watched The Wiz, and it's still not a great film, but it's still a film that sparks off so many ideas in your head in terms of artistic ambition. So I watched that, which brought me to a certain episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is a really wild episode where the gang watches The Wiz and falls asleep while watching The Wiz, and they wake up as black people, and it's called The Gang Got Blacked, and they deal with, like, they're trying to open their car, but the external world is seeing them as black people, so they think they're trying to steal a car. So it's that sort of a project, which was really exciting, and that idea of a dreamscape made me think of, I mean, still, because you are in a Lynch mode, right? So I thought of Roy Orbison's haunting song In Dreams. And when you listen to In Dreams, you have to watch Dennis Hopper sing In Dreams, and you have to think of Blue Velvet. And so that's how I think the Lynch rabbit hole really wrapped up for me, to watch Blue Velvet, which is a perfect, perfect, perfect film, which is macabre and strange and beautiful and nightmarish all at the same time. And I don't know how he pulled it off, but it's just so perfect. And it led me, because it's a film about a severed year, or at least a film that begins with a severed year. So it led me to think for a while. I looked at Van Gogh's self-portraits with bandaged ear, and thought about how Lynch would consider his own work, how an artist looks at their own bloody, severed, messy work, and what they make of it. Because Lynch famously refused to explain, right? He would never tell you what his films are about, and you were supposed to bring your own meaning to them. But that, with Van Gogh, that was the end of it. And I don't know, I dare say David would approve.
David would approve. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I was thinking of what when we decided to do this episode, I was thinking of what example I could come up with, and I think the funnest rabbit hole that I've been into this year started in that most cinematic of cities, Hong Kong. At a bar on a very high floor overlooking the dramatic Hong Kong and very cinematic, again, Hong Kong skyline, sitting with this wonderful man called Mike Goodrich, who is a film producer and has been a producer on some wonderful films, including Quo Vadis Ida and Triangle of Sadness. And he was telling me about a film that he's working on with Tilda Swinton. And of course, then we started, fangirling, fanboying on Tilda Swinton, as one does, as is sort of customary. And I began to tell him that there's this film that she directed called Seasons in Concy, which is about her friendship with the critic John Berger.
Mhm.
And I remember watching this film when it came out. It's a small independent production, so it had a very limited release in London. And since then, this was, I think, 2014 or 13. And since then, I have not managed to I've been wanting to revisit this film, but I haven't managed to find a copy of it anywhere.
Hmm.
And every couple of months, I'll think of it in some context or the other and try to find it. Even when Berger passed, I tried to look for a print, didn't find one. So I was telling him about it. And the next morning, the kind soul that he is, from the airline lounge, he was leaving the next morning, he sent me a link to that film. And it was one of the most exciting moments I've had culturally this year. And of course, I came back and, promptly sat down to watch it. And once I finished watching it, I was in Tilda heaven. And I thought to myself that this is a good time. So I hadn't seen Almodovar's The Room Next Door
Hmm.
with Julianne Moore, and I've been saving it up for a perfect evening. And I was like, here it is. I need more Tilda. And I love Almodovar. This is the moment. So I watched that film and I absolutely adored that film. And it got me thinking that, it got me thinking a lot more because Tilda is a given. Almodovar is a given, right? These are the geniuses that have shaped my universe in so many ways. But it got me thinking a lot more about Julianne Moore, and I um, came across this film of hers, which I think is on Apple TV, called Sharper, and I adore noir as a genre. So I was like, I haven't seen this film. It's all Julianne Moore. It's noir. Let's dig into it. Unfortunately, the film was very disappointing. And it kind of confirmed my belief that we just don't have good noir anymore. It died
Hmm.
um, at the end of a sudden decade, and it has remained in its grave since. And but I needed, that couldn't be how this ends, right? I didn't have anything particular in mind, but obviously I was still in Almodovar's universe. And one of the things that I so loved about The Room Next Door is that, when I was growing up, I didn't watch films in which two women would be talking to one another and casually having an intellectual conversation, talking about books or cinema. The protagonist of this film is one is a novelist and the other one is a nonfiction writer, narrative nonfiction writer, and a journalist. And that's not what the film is about. The film is about life and death and friendship and, everything in between. But on one of their walks, these two women are very casually talking about Julianne Moore's character's next project, which she's telling Tilda Swinton is based on two characters from Virginia Woolf's Circle, the Bloomsbury group. And while I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that a couple of years ago, there had been a film on Virginia Woolf's relationship with this other writer, Vita and Virginia. And I hadn't finished watching it. I had started watching it. Something had come up. Not for any lack in the film. So I went back and saw that film again. And the film isn't particularly great, but, the Bloomsbury group is so exciting. There's this group of intellectuals, writers, artists, their fraught friendships with one another, this idea of meeting up every evening and trying to run an independent press and, trying to change the way people think about the arts and culture. And to my mind, I was thinking that, I can't think of any other group that has cut across silos in the way that they did, right? Where artists were talking to, and in India, of course, that happened in the 50s, where there were a lot of artists and theater people and writers, poets who were talking to one another. But internationally, I couldn't think of anything other than perhaps the Algonquin table, of which, the greatest character to my mind was Dorothy Parker. Anyway, so still in Virginia Woolf's world, I thought I should revisit Mrs. Dalloway, which I had seen last year. And I typed out Mrs. Dalloway. I was very keen because I had, like I said, seen it recently. But, I was like, well, that's a good enough segue. And Amazon Prime's algorithm suggested to me a film on Dorothy Parker's life that I didn't know existed.
Mm-hmm.
And it had all these sort of like cameos by Gwyneth Paltrow and Stanley Tucci. And I don't know how I'd missed this film entirely. It was a small film, not a great film, but what a discovery it was. And I don't know how, I suppose Prime picked it up, not having any access to what I was thinking, simply by virtue of female writer, film on female writer by female writer, or some such. But, I ended up watching it. After I finished watching it, I was like, okay, well, I had thought of Mrs. Dalloway. Let me go back to Mrs. Dalloway. While I was typing Mrs. Dalloway again, I thought to myself that, it's interesting because Vita and Virginia is about the writing of Orlando, which is a book that Virginia Woolf writes, inspired by this other woman writer. And he was like, seen a Broadway production of Orlando, but I'm sure that I know that there is an Orlando film version of Orlando, but nothing was coming up in my head. So I typed it out, and of course it exists. And of course, Orlando is played by Tilda Swinton. And I haven't seen the film, so I watched the film. At the end of that film, I was like, okay, I'm done with this rabbit hole. All right, I'm so done. This is done. This is over. This is a beautiful ending. We are back to Tilda Swinton. Um, but at that point in my life, I was reading a lot for work. I was reading a lot for something I was working on. I hadn't been reading for pleasure for a while. And just this beautiful bubble that I was emerging out of made me think that, okay, you know what? I want to read one book for pleasure, not connected with any of this, and then go back to my sort of. And the book I've been saving up is the last of Deborah Levy's living autobiographies, Real Estate. And I was like, okay, well, you know what? It's going to be a little heartbreaking when I'm done with all three, but this is as good a time as any. So I started reading it, absolutely savoring it, loving it. One morning, I take that book to, I go early for a meeting to a cafe. I'm sitting down with my cortado, and I walk up to the counter to try and get myself a croissant or something. And on the counter, I see a magazine called The Happy Reader. And I start looking through it, and I've not heard of this magazine. It's a magazine on reading and on books and on writing, and it used to be a magazine issued by Penguin. So I try and find a copy and find out that the magazine no longer exists, but I can order the last issue. I order it, and on the cover of that issue is Tilda Swinton. And in the pages of that issue is Tilda Swinton being interviewed by Deborah Levy. And I almost don't, I'm just incredulous at this point. And it also makes me think that, we talk about algorithms in terms of social media listening to us, but the universe is also listening and doing its own algorithmic work. And so, of course, 21 days later, that magazine arrives in post, and I start reading the interview. And Deborah and Tilda, it's apparent, know each other a little bit, but they're not friends. They don't know each other very well. This interview is being recorded during COVID, so it's a virtual interview, and it's an interview about reading and writing and authors. And they talk about their favorite authors. And somehow, Deborah starts to talk about Sigrid Nunez and how much she admires this woman. And at this point, Tilda asks the producers to put the recording off, saying that there's something I want to share with Deborah Levy, but I don't want this recorded. And from my vantage point in 2025, I know what she wants to tell Deborah Levy, that she has signed a film with Almodovar based on Sigrid Nunez's book, What You Are Going Through, which he will make as The Room Next Door. And I mean, I don't even know. At this point, I was like, I think I'm going to have to forcibly cut this cord because I feel like I'm trapped in this parallel universe of Tilda Swinton's making, which would have been my fantasy. But at this point in time, maybe I just need to go back to the real world. So yeah, I would definitely categorize that as my funnest rabbit hole this year.
Yeah. Wow.
So, Raja, I was wondering also that this doesn't happen all the time, right? Like, it's not like every single film we see will take us into a rabbit hole. What are the conditions in which it really happens? One is obvious, which is that we have to like the starting point to begin with. Like, it has to be a book we love, or a movie we love, or an exhibition of art that we love. Only then can we start engaging with it beyond the surface. But what else?
Well, I mean, there has to be, like you said, a willingness to engage beyond, because you want to kind of stay in the aura that this thing has conjured up for you, either the aura or a similar enough aura to just, be able to enjoy it. I think one of the primary things that I have a problem with is, like, when I watch a great film, I don't want to watch another great film right away. I think that's really that weighs on me. Like when I'm at a film festival and I suddenly see in my 5 films a day, if I've seen a great film at film 3, I might skip film 4 just so that I'll have a coffee and think about what I saw and let that sit with me. So I feel like when we are talking about these rabbit holes and the exciting thing of them being mixed media and them being in different shapes by different creators, I mean, it's always wonderful to go down, say, an entire, you know, a rabbit hole of just seeing one director's films, for example, or one writer's books, which is perfectly valid. But sometimes you need, I think, the openness to try and engage with something else, like when you listen to a musician and think of what else could have perhaps influenced that person. So, like when you spoke about that interview and had that, you had the hindsight of knowing what they were talking about. And that just makes it all, I mean, this whole artistic fly on the wall situation so exciting. So that can come from anywhere, from a director's commentary or from knowing that this film is paying homage to this film, and then it could just be about an artist, or it could just be about a piece of music that's used somewhere, which ties everything else together in a different way.
And I think the best way to do it is do it sort of in a free association, almost subconscious way. When you sit down to really think about it, perhaps the associations you'll come up with are more intellectually informed. But when you are not really thinking, when you're just by yourself in the aura, like you said, of a great book or a great film, it's very interesting what might crop up as an accompanying piece to it and why. And when you then sit down to dissect it, it may not have been the most obvious association that you would have made with that film or with that book or with that piece of writing, if you were doing it as an intellectual exercise or a critical exercise, if you will.
No, yeah, that's true. Because even when we discuss our rabbit holes, which is kind of where this whole show emerged from, I think it's more in hindsight, right? We know what led to what, and then those connections happen. Like you weren't seeking out Tilda on the
Yeah.
cover of the magazine, but she came to you. So it all kind of, once you open, there's a happenstance to it. But yeah, I think the connections really are made in hindsight, which is, or instinctively, as opposed to, like you said, intellectually.
So I was wondering,
Hmm.
and since we're talking about free association and the role of the subconscious in guiding us through these rabbit holes, should we play a game? Should we perhaps um, start with the name of a book or a movie and see where it leads the other and so on, like our own little antakshari?
Association and Takshri. Okay, let me start with one of your favorite films and just throw this to you because it's a great film. I've been meaning to watch it again, which I will soon because there's a new film coming out about the French New Wave. But it's Jean-Luc Godard's A Bout de Souffle, Breathless. Where does Breathless leave you?
That's very interesting. I think the first thing that comes to my mind is a film that I didn't love very much, but is a very important film. Um, and this film is called Seberg, which is on the life of the lead actress of Breathless, played by Kristen Stewart. And it's about Hoover's FBI hounding Seberg for her political views, for her relationships, and how that curtailed her career and had a huge impact on her life and her mental health. So I think that's the film that comes to my mind.
Well, I haven't watched that, and I didn't know enough about Seberg's life. But when I think of the McCarthy era and the witch hunts and all of that, I keep going back to George Clooney's beautiful, beautiful black and white film, Good Night and Good Luck, which is just, I think for all of us as journalists, or all of us as even people who appreciate journalism, it is just such an essential film and about the newscaster, uh, Murrow. And it is just, yeah, that's the film. I think it's black and white and it's beautiful. And
It's perfect. I think it's as near a perfect film that I have seen in my lifetime. And as we record this, there is a Broadway production in which Clooney is playing Murrows, and go to another film or another book about the McCarthy era, because there have been so many films and books on that period and that witch hunt. But I think the one I'm thinking of right now is a film from back home that I absolutely adore, and also think of as a near perfect film, which is Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi.
Hmm.
And the reason why I'm thinking of Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi in the context of Good Night and Good Luck is because um, the emergency was such a foundational period in the political history of this country when it was still a relatively young democracy. Our generation came right after the emergency, and the idea of it really informed our own um worldview and our own sort of political activism in many ways. So in that context, I don't think that a lot of films or a lot of books do justice to that period in our history. But Hazaro Khwaishein Aisi, to my mind, does, because I think it examines the way in which it goes beyond simply talking about the emergency as, suppression of civil rights and democracy. It kind of really examines the characters who were in Delhi in that moment and how this period impacted them, shaped the culture of the city, the society, the responses to it, and so on. And in that sense, um, of course, a big part of it was censorship, and in that sense, I think it in my mind exists alongside Good Night and Good Luck.
Right. No, it's an exquisite film. I think Sudhir Mishra really gave us something special there because the it not being about an ideology, but about the idea of ideologies really, and how they contrast, and how we, in our formative years, in our impressionable years, how all of that is so porous and how it changes. It's a really beautiful film, and I think about that song a lot as well. Uh,
Sorry, and also a film that has aged really well, because I
hmm,
keep thinking back to that one throwaway sentence
hmm.
in a throwaway scene where the character resembling Sanjay Gandhi is asked that, um, there's a contract being negotiated, and he's asked, that what if you're not there to make sure this is done right? And he says, do we look like the kind of people who won't be around? Um, famous haunting last lines. But sorry, go on.
Yeah, no, 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 absolutely.
Where does it take you?
I think just also the mention of Sanjay Gandhi here because it was. I think it takes me to my favorite film about the emergency, which was made during the emergency, which was again one of those really brave and crazy films to make. But Satyajit Ray made it and it's called Hero Raja Deshe, and it was a sequel to the children's film Gupikain Bhagawain. But this was a very thinly veiled critique of Indira Gandhi and a critique of fascism, and it talks about you know brainwashing machines and about a system where education is rubbished and the people, I mean the teachers are the outlaws, and it's such a remarkable film because it works completely as a children's film. It is absolutely fascinating and fun, but it's also this beautiful, hopeful film about dictatorship itself, and which gets more and more powerful. The falling of the statue and the rising of the humanist chants. I think that is just it gets unfortunately more and more prescient or more and more powerful with each passing decade and each passing dictator. But yeah, that's the film.
Yeah, what a great film. And again, it reminds me of this pointless debate about whether Satyajit Ray was sufficiently political as a filmmaker, because I think the way in which he engaged with political ideas um, had a much greater impact than maybe, and this might be controversial, but a lot of his contemporaries who were very immediate in responding to what was going on ground. But that's neither here nor there. Speaking of Ray's engagement with political ideas, obviously makes me think of Ghore Baire and the way in which he understood and interpreted the soul of Tagore's ideas. Ghore Baire, to my mind, is a great play, but it should be read as an accompanying piece to Tagore's essays on nationalism and his sort of very profound warning and debates about what um, the limits and the sort of frictions of nationalism are. And some of these essays and debates, I co run a platform called the Indian History Collective. We recently carried on Indian History Collective, which means I reread them. And I think they're just some of the most powerful writing on the idea of belonging, the idea of the narrow ideas of um, nationalism, patriotism that the whole world is grappling with at this point in time.
Yeah, so that's a interesting call to think about nationalism, and it's always exciting when a work forces you to confront your your preconceived biases about nationalism, and also says that it can stand for different things. And in modern Hindi cinema, the film that I think does that so brilliantly is Vishal Bhardwaj's Haider, because it speaks about the Kashmir issue with not just gravitas, but with this kind of unreliable narrator dynamic where the film could be entirely different based on who you choose to believe, based on whether you choose to believe the king and the state and K.K. Menon, who was looking out for this boy, or you believe the insurgent spy Irfan, who comes in and basically tells him something that becomes all he has to go on with, and it works brilliantly in both ways. And um, that's an incredible way to adapt Hamlet, I feel, especially for um, a tortured land. And I really think Heather is one of those films that you see how impactful it is when you can look at it again, and you can say, I want to try and see it from this perspective, and everything lines up so brilliantly. So there's an ornateness in the way, in the writing of the film, yes, but also in the edit of the film, wherein you can choose to believe what you believe. All you have for real, and what is the soul of that film, is the mother son relationship, and that's for real. The Shahid Kapoor taboo relationship, the relationship that is as taboo as they come. But it is, yeah, that's the soul of Heather, and everything else, the country, the lands, the country without a name. There's a fable-like quality to all of it. Like, it is dreadful and it is realistic, but it's also the shifting sands of unreliability, which have always fascinated me.
I am thinking of this brilliant novel by the British Palestinian writer Isabella Hamad called Enter Ghost, which is about this woman who is a theater director, and she travels to the West Bank and gets involved in a production of Hamlet in the West Bank. It's a very, very powerful novel about the conflict in that area. It came out in, I think, if I'm not mistaken, March 2024. And the world as we know it, of course, changed in October 2024 after the Hamas attack on Israel. And since then, the kind of carnage and genocide that we've seen in Gaza is unprecedented, even by the standards of that prolonged conflict. And I wonder if we have it in us to reckon with what is going on in Gaza in books and art and cinema in times to come. But I do find myself thinking of Isabella Hamad's Enter Ghost and Shakespeare's um, sheer power in being able to be a common language between so many cultures around the world.
Yeah, that sounds really powerful. Um, I hate to throw another Shakespeare into the mix. It feels wrong, but this is such a left field choice that it was a film I saw last year and really left an impression on me. And it's called Grand Theft Hamlet, and uh, it's it is about conflict zones, really. I mean, quite literally, but it's also about people grappling with an inconceivable reality, which is that it was during the pandemic, and it's about a couple of actors who are finding themselves unemployed because theaters are closed and it's the pandemic. So they're living their second life inside the world of Grand Theft Auto. And they decide that in this world where you can do anything, which is largely people will go and hijack cars and steal, and kill cops and all of that. In that world, they decide to stage a production of Hamlet, and they want to do it properly, and they do auditions, and people come, and people are in different shapes, and someone's like a giant bikini clad warrior woman, and someone's like a half man half fish, and all these characters, these creatures come together to rehearse and to do Hamlet. And it's really insane when you're watching it. You start out being amused by it, but then you realize the remarkable power of Shakespeare and of story to kind of, for all these people, some of whom have no idea about Shakespeare or about the lines, they've just been told to say a couple of things or to come in and make something explode at a certain point of time. And they also refer to it as really big budget blockbuster Shakespeare, because Shakespeare on like a video game budget, which is insane, right? No one could do that, and it works. It works because the characters do, and it makes you really hopeful about the fact that you can believe in story, like what that can do to you. The fact that we can believe in a narrative and just shape ourselves around it. And for a little while, it gives us something to cling to and something to work around.
While you were saying that, I was thinking two things. One is that I absolutely have to watch this film because you've recommended it to me earlier. And the second was, oh my God, am I going to be able to come up with something that is not Shakespeare? And the utter inevitability of Shakespeare made me think of Judi Dench's recent book, which is a kind of memoir to the man who pays the rent, which is her tribute, her ode to Shakespeare. It's an absolutely delightful, delightful read. I mean, what's not to love? There's theatre, there's Judi Dench, there's Shakespeare. Oh, what a perfect summer treat that was.
Wow. Yes, it's the idea of an artist paying tribute to another artist is a very powerful one. I keep like it just kind of democratizes the idea of idolization, because when we idolize someone, when you look up to a certain figure in the culture, and then when you discover that that figure is also looking up to someone else who you share that adulation with, and then it just kind of puts you on the same page. So when you realize that someone, a hero of yours, also looks up with the same awe toward another person, and then that just brings you together as fans, and that's really something. I mean, there is for me, in the great Leonard Cohen song, Tower of Song, he talks about how he's paying his rent in the Tower of Song, and he says, "I said to Hank Williams, how lonely does it get? Hank Williams hasn't answered yet, but I hear him coughing all night long, 100 floors above me in the Tower of Song."
Wow, wow. This is my absolute favorite corner in the world of culture, movies, books, which is writers and filmmakers, talking about the long shadow cast by those who've come before them, whether it's in the same vein, Dylan's song for Guthrie, whether it's Pico Iyer on Graham Greene. But I think the thing that's most popping in my head for obvious reasons is something you mentioned cursorily when we started this conversation, which is that you've been thinking about Breathless because um, Linklater has a new film on the making of Breathless, Nouvelle Vague, coming out. That's been all the talk. We both love Linklater. And the French New Wave, again, is one of those movements that has cast such a long shadow that filmmakers from around the world have tried to make sense of its impact on them and on culture. So we have Linklater, but then a couple of years ago, I think 2017 or so, there was another film by uh, the filmmaker Michel, whose second name I can't very well pronounce, who made The Artist. He made a French film called Godard Mon Amour, which was about Godard's love life and his filmmaking. It was in English, I think it was released as Redoubtable. And then, of course, there's my favorite film of all times, which is Bertolucci's Dreamers, which is about the 60s in Paris. But it is his tribute to the French New Wave. So here we are, almost a full circle, and this would be a perfect time to conclude our little association in Dakshiri, perhaps.
Yes, and also it's always a good idea to cut Pragya off when she starts talking about dreamers, because that could be many seasons of podcasts in itself. But thank you so much for listening to us, and we really hope that this idea of free association between different forms of culture, different forms of art, uh, just gives you some ideas of what to do when you've finished a great series or finished a great book and don't quite know what to do with that feeling. So, if you can channel it to consuming something else, consuming something interesting, I mean, we would love to hear about it. And we would love for you to go on hearing us. So please like, subscribe, do all the things that one is supposed to do. And we'll see you soon.
We will see you soon, indeed. Goodbye.